Welcome to Sungrounded Farm here in Terrebonne, Oregon. We are in the northeast corner of Deschutes County. We are a small-scale market garden. We own 5 acres and crop just over 1.5. We chose to participate in this SARE grant because ethical management of the land is very important to us. We want to be good stewards of the land and appropriately use our resources. And honestly, we didn't have that much hard data backing up the irrigation that we're doing here on the farm. And so we were really curious to see how the irrigation that we are doing is actually impacting the soil versus just, going out there, sticking your finger in the top inch or two and being like, oh, it's wet, or oh, it looks dry. And so we really think that this project has been a good way to get more in touch with how the water interacts with the soil and then produces the crops that provide our livelihood. We're located in the high desert, so we receive 11 inches of precipitation annually, which comes predominantly in the forms of snowfall in the winter. Our soil type, we have a loamy sand, so we are definitely on the sandy end. So the water that we utilize to grow crops here on the farm is provided through the Central Oregon Irrigation District, which is the oldest irrigation district in the area. So we have senior water rights. And we get around 60 inches of irrigation water per year to use here on our farm. We only get water once a week on Thursdays for 10.5 hours. And from there, we fill a small retention pond here on our property to see us through the other 6 days a week. And then I try and put down about 1 inch of water on the entire property. And then we use our small retention pond to supplement strictly the vegetables in order to see them through the other 6 days a week. We run predominantly overhead sprinkling. We do use drip irrigation, some out in the field, but mainly in the greenhouses. And in the winter, we switch to overhead in the greenhouses as well, and we use inverted micro sprinklers. So here at this farm, we are a BCS farm, which means we operate on standardized 30-inch wide beds. The main tools that our BCS uses are the rotary plow, the rototiller, the power harrow, and the flail mower. Our time here at the farm, we've been dealing with rhizomous desert grass, and we get tired of just rototilling and rototilling and rototilling our beds because we watch the soil just turn into sand very quickly. And so we've been trying to phase the rototiller out and incorporate the power harrow more. We do still rototill if we have grassy problems, but generally our predominant bed prep strategy would be to put compost on top of the bed in the fall, leave it all winter, and then in the spring come and rotary plow the pads on either side of it to throw the soil onto the bed, and then bring the power harrow to stir the top 2 to 3 inches of soil and form a beautiful bed surface that we can either transplant or direct sow into. So for this project at this farm, we did 3 different bed prep styles. We added compost to all 3 beds in the fall, which is our standard treatment for all of our field beds. And then in the spring, we broad forked all the beds to increase aeration. And then we rotary plowed 2 of the 3 beds. And then we took the rototiller to one of those rotary plowed beds. And then we power harrowed the other rotary plowed bed. And then the 3rd bed we left flat, so we did not use the plow to throw soil onto it. And we simply power harrowed the compost into the soil. From what we noticed throughout this trial, all 3 beds behaved fairly similarly. Even the data from the tensiometers came back fairly uniform across all 3. And then the non-raised bed, we just encountered some issues with transplanting, but otherwise the crops grew fairly similarly. They had very similar insect pressure. There was one bed, the bed that we left flat and did not raise, that the onions just lacked the real green vigor that the other 2 beds had, and we didn't sell as many of them as fresh onions. However, in the end, when we cured them, it was a similar yield for cured onions. In terms of bed prep, we are probably more inclined to stick to what we've been doing with raising the bed slightly and then harrowing, which does cause it to settle back down and slough off, is what we call it, into the paths. But that's the one that we feel like really worked the best in this scenario. So we had a fairly wet spring. It was fairly cold and gray all the way from essentially like May through June, which is distinct for this area and that time of year. And it caused a lot of my first tensiometer readings to just read 0. The first 3 weeks in a row essentially were just, nope, that soil's hydrated, with just standard irrigating 1 day a week on the day that I got water. And so with the tensiometers, having those readings gave me the confidence to not then go and put unnecessary water on these crops that I didn't need. However, since it was cold and gray, there wasn't anything else that really needed the water, so I ended up not using my full water allocation that time of year. And then later on in the year, essentially starting right about July 6th, is when we started to get more serious tensiometer readings that indicated that, okay, you need to step it up from 1 day of irrigation to 2 or to 3. However, all of the crops were feeling that way, and the onions were a fairly low priority compared to higher dollar crops. And so I did find myself in the hot months, July and August, having to definitely decide where I was going to cut water, and the onions definitely were one of the ones that got less water here on the farm. But I do think it bears mentioning that right around, and I could check my email, it's in there somewhere, but right around July, like the second week of July, the irrigation district, due to the drought that is impacting the entire western United States, decided to cut back the water from 100% to 75%, and then reeled it back to 60% in August. And they were still going at 100% water all through June, when the soil was fully hydrated to begin with, which I just think it's interesting that the water that we are getting does not quite match the needs of the crops during those times of year. And personally, I would like to see more water allocated to July and August, where we regularly see temperatures over 100 degrees, versus June, where it's reliably more in the 80s. We still get some precipitation, and it just seems like we don't quite need the water as much that time of year. Regarding the things that we learned from this project, certainly it was fascinating to see throughout the year how increase in soil temperature and a steady amount of water does not lead to the soil maintaining the same hydration throughout the year. And we really wouldn't have known that without these tensiometers. And it's certainly something that I'm inclined to do in the future, putting them in. I'm more curious, so this year we did them all essentially right next to each other in the same area. I would really like to put them more in separate areas of the field to get a feel for more what the water is doing on my property as a whole, versus just a small snapshot of what it's doing right here in this area. However, I thought it was a really good project for looking at ways that we can more appropriately manage our water use in a climate where water is a scarce resource.